Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for waiting. Apologies for the delay. We are back on track and we are very, very happy to have Srimati Devaki Jain with us for this wonderful session that is going to be a conversation with Kinnera Murthy on the book titled The Brass Notebook. Devaki Jain, we know, is a foremost Indian economist and writer who has worked mainly in the field of feminist economics. In 2006, she was awarded the Padma Bhushan, the third highest civilian award from the Government of India, for her contribution to social justice and the empowerment of women. Kinnera Murthy is a fellow festival director, former Dean of Studies, Administrative Staff College of India. She's now a director on several corporate boards and academic advisory councils. I request Kinnera to take over and engage Srimati Devaki Jain. Thank you so much for coming, Ms. Jain, for this session. We look forward to a very, very wonderful and enlightening session. Thank you so much.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Hi.
My apologies to all of you, including Anita, for keeping you waiting.
No.
My computer just decided to play with me, so at last we are here. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry.
No, it happened to me in the morning. I think while we are in the digital age, we have to manage with these snacks. But thank you that you could join, because I was totally disappointed when I thought, you were not going to join. Before we start, I'd like to talk about this book to our viewers. Can you see this smiling young lady here in her traditional Madurai Sungadi sari and with her diamond nose stud, very homely looking? This is the young version of the gracious lady in the frame next to me today. Can you believe that this lady did everything that boys did in her childhood? She rode horses, she cycled, later in saris too, climbed trees, hitchhiked in Europe, studied in Oxford, went on a transnational road trip through several countries from Oxford to Delhi through Kabul and Pakistan in a Land Rover, adventures on the way, lived with partner and later married him outside her caste and region against all opposition, is bold about her child sexual abuse, sexuality and liaisons, walked with Vinoba Bhave, associated with Jayaprakash Narayan, hobnobbed with world leaders like Nelson Mandela, Kissinger, Julius Nyerere, Desmond Tutu, to name just a few. Even now has lifelong associations with Amartya Sen, Gloria Steinem et al., defined feminization of poverty and made a difference to feminist narratives in economics, superbly carved out her own persona despite being the life partner of an equally accomplished man who held distinguished public offices in India and in South Africa. A lady who seized freedom at every opportunity that she could. And she put all this into a 200-page short memoir. I suggest that you all read it. Ma'am, may I, with your permission, use an oxymoron to define you, a bohemian traditional or a traditional bohemian? It's an oxymoron, but I think that's what is very apt. In one of your earlier interviews, ma'am, I saw that you were not keen to write your biography. By your own admission, you are a reluctant autobiographer. And it must have been a daunting task to write at 87. For that, I salute you, ma'am. But I think you did have the inclination and wherewithal to write it, because you do talk about the golden book of Anna Wolf and Lessing's conversation with you. So why didn't you write before?
To answer your question, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the program. Secondly, please accept my apologies a second time. Sometimes these tools fail us, and I feel embarrassed that I kept everybody waiting, especially Anita Desai. I don't know whether these descriptions of bohemian and traditional are categories that are graspable for a meaningful answer. I don't think I was bohemian. I don't think I was traditional. Actually, my own experience of history, which is perhaps you probably know more about it than I do, is that many women in the past, including the previous century, that is not only 19th, but even 18th, have affirmed whatever they want, taken steps which may not look exactly what happened to their generations earlier. I don't think it was an environment of bohemian. I often wonder whether it couldn't be a self-created energy or a self-created goal, plus the strength to back it. Now, where did that come from? It's a difficult question to answer. I would love to have a discussion just on that by other women who have broken what is called I don't like this idea, broken the ceiling. I've never accepted that. But broken out of what is expected of them from the tradition. And now if you look at some of the other books that are coming out, almost all the women are writing about how they did what they wanted to do, but it was not the convention that they did. They did something else. So I'm trying to be serious to say that the hypothesis that you are different and that's why you broke out should be challenged by us. I think it's not breaking out. It's doing what you're moved to do. Let me just take a minute of your time.
Please.
To say that I studied the biography of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya, Aruna Safali, and some of the greats that I had the privilege of meeting in the 1980s. Again, their lives were not something where you suddenly find a drama that they broke out. They were political animals and they followed a political path by pushing for them. The path didn't open for them, the gates didn't open, but they pushed themselves into it. Not only by doing any kind of chamchagiri with men, but a drive within themselves. Now, what I'm coming to is there's a drive that is born inside you. And there's nothing you can do about either pushing it down or understanding where it came from. I have a whole theory about this. I won't bore you just now. But if the question turns up, I would like to explain more what I think makes us different from what is others in the time.
This title, Brass Notebook, I know you took it from Anna Wolf's Golden Notebook, but why? Why Brass Notebook? Any particular reason?
Yeah, I was trying to think of a metal which is not gold, which is very far away from all our lives. And secondly, something that could somehow show that we are engaged with that metal. And I'm sure if you spoke to your mother or your grandmother yourself, you'll find that brass was the metal with which our utensils were made. It looks surprising to me now that we were cooking in brass vessels with that kalai inside to prevent the poisoning. So even the sweets we made was often with a brass tawa which had the inside. So I thought that I would say that I wanted to imitate the Golden Notebook, which means that you write notes on different moments of your life. It's not like one thread, which goes, I was born like that, I went to school like that, and then I married like that, I children. Not like that, not chronologic, but little glimpses of life. And that's the good thing about Doris Lessing's book. It has those chapters or those books which give different dimensions to her life. So A, I wanted to imitate that style. B, I didn't want to claim that mine was gold. So I was trying to find what I called a lower metal, which turned out to be brass. It was just a gimmick, you want to get a title for your book and you want to locate the title in something which is bigger than yourself. So you think of Doris Lessing, then you think of brass, things like that. Sometimes these titles don't come out of deep reasoning or yogic practice. It's a flash saying, why don't I imitate it? But imitate it in a more fair way.
Yeah.
I explained all that in the introduction.
Now, imitation is the best compliment you can pay to a person who inspired you in some way or the other. Actually, you have the whole propensity to write a thing, because you are a diarist. Because, when I try to visit past, I find it is all hazy. It's suddenly a strange country, But you had your maps. All your diaries were there. And there are so many stories, when I was reading your book, I was feeling a little bit unhappy because there is so much there, and a lot of people who read your book would have learnt a lot from that. So, there are people who write books in a very chronological fashion. There are people who write books about their accomplishments. What you have done, I feel, that you have taken a whole lot of colorful weeds from your life and tossed them at us and said, now you choose your pattern. And in a way, it's a good style of writing, but it leaves a very, some kind of a thirst that is unsatiated. So what do you think is the difference between men and women writing memoirs?
Well, I don't know whether I would be able to make it a gender issue. Though you might say there is a certain modesty or unwillingness to be too rash amongst women compared to men, but I wouldn't take it so far. I think even women who write biographies have had the same as men, and they're both the variants. But I'll tell you my reason I zoomed in on this particular style. Most people seem to write, as you correctly say, whether it's men or women, a kind of a biographical chart, like I went to school there, I went to college there, then I did that profession, usually it's chronologically related to the date line of their life. I wanted to break away from that. Okay. And I spent a lot of time, maybe 2 years or more, how to do that breakaway. Obviously, you can't get away from the fact that you have to talk about your birth and who you were born to. That's a kind of necessary beginning. I even wanted to avoid that, but I couldn't avoid it. As you'll see in the first chapter, I refer to how my father figured out how to do it, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And that is because most of the biographies in India, autobiographies, unfortunately, are very self-projecting. So you say, I was born, then I went to school, then I got a first class, then I got number of rank, I got a job. So it's a kind of trajectory of achievement. How to avoid that and yet tell your story? It really was a challenge to me. So I decided to make profiles. That's why you'd find a profile of my mother, then my father. And then I couldn't continue with profiles because what else do you do? So I then went to college, where I went to college. So, it was really not carefully planned house that I built. To the house that I built in my book, in trying to avoid certain pitfalls. But I can't say achieve the ideal. I would like to rewrite it now if I could. But as you know, I'm 87 and obviously I can't make that effort. But I'm glad that it evoked something or the other in some people's hearts. And particularly young people write to me saying that they were glad I came open on my sexual endeavors. And that was the most difficult one to decide whether to use it or not, because sometimes you may immediately be trashed. Oh, she's showing off, like she's trying to be a Kamala Das and not succeeding. So I didn't want to get into that abuse either. But quite honestly, the reason I did so much transparency of my personal life was because this book really is addressed to the young of today, the young Indian woman who has to handle the tradition, but she's in a mixed situation. Most of the colleges are co-ed. It was not so in my time. So they're struggling. My nieces are also struggling. They have boyfriends, they're living with people, but how to tell their mother. So I thought if one could show that you could do all that and yet be as conventional as I look. I mean, if you look at me now, I look like a pakka old Iyengar lady. So the images can be as traditional as you like, but you can lead a life of a revolutionary type of individual life and turn up in the right place at the right time. So it was partly to show that there's nothing unusual and nothing wrong in breaking out.
Yeah. Actually, I feel that women, memoirs are written with a lot more of a personal approach and honesty. So that's the reason I wanted to ask that question about the gender thing. But of course, we'll avoid the gender issue here. And there are some things, in your biography which come out suddenly, like, about your almost Milson Boone romance with Lakshmi Jain. Absolutely comes without a warning. It's mentioned only when you decide that he has to break off his engagement to another person. Till that time, there is no warning whatsoever that this is coming. So how does, one, I think there's something unfinished there. You're flitting like a butterfly and leaving us with a lot of clues here and there. So it makes us feel a little bit wanting more, if you know what I mean.
How to tell you? It's true that I was myself not fully aware of how I felt about this man till I got the shock that she had chosen somebody else. And sometimes if you read other stories of war, of conflict, you'll find that there's a moment when some people call it enlightenment, like the Buddha got the enlightenment. But sometimes it is just something that strikes you, which never struck you before. And it's true that it was the fact that he had committed himself to somebody that woke me up to the fact that I wanted him to commit himself to me. And in a way, I can't tell you this is not a happy story. Because it's no woman really who is a decent woman like I would like to be, would like to kill or injure another woman's life or expectations of life by grabbing something that woman had, which is what I did. And so it has left a sense of distaste in me. But that's the interesting thing about passion, And if you read books on passion, like Fatima Manisi writes, or even Simone de Beauvoir writes, that is feminists who write about passion of the kind that which leads to love and romance, it tends to overpower all other, feelings, emotions, even moral rules. You must have read so many stories of devoted women or men having love affairs with other women. Now, why did that happen? There's some kind of drive that takes you beyond all the moral ceilings that you have actually accepted and approve of. So I myself am staggered when I read what I did, that I did it. I'm honestly telling you that it's not something I would normally do, hurt somebody to get my own pleasure. But that's another aspect that I was trying to pull so that people of the next generation can see it. Love of the kind that leads to the passion of romance and wanting a man, or maybe in another case, a woman, is another kind of drive. It's a drive which is difficult to grasp unless you've experienced it. So if I share it with others, to share that there's nothing wrong that can happen, that your passion is so strong for something that you break all the moral rules that you yourself accepted in the past. So much of the descriptions of my incidents in my life, I can't say I thought about it too much, but are a message to others. It's not so much to get the literary award, but it's a message to others, especially to other women, especially to younger women, that these conflicts take place. Mm-hmm. And they are very often moral conflicts too. But if you have clarity that this is what you must do, then you do it. For example, one sentence, and I will end the answer to this question, is when I was sharing myself with this dilemma, and I shared it with the man I loved and whose marriage or engagement I was breaking. He was a very philosophical and rather moral person himself. Said that if it's the search of truth, if you're just being truthful and then taking this action because that's your truth, then there's nothing to feel guilty about. I thought that was very interesting general advice, not only for people like me who, in this case, we are talking of a love affair. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that if you really grasp with an idea which is not necessarily clear, then as long as you're truthful to yourself, it should be done. You should just follow your truth. I found that very helpful at the time. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
That's very interesting, of course. And the way you're supporting this, I'm sure a lot of women out there are getting confidence in themselves.
I hope so. I know. It's very difficult for me also to try to explain all the naughty, bad things that I did.
So I'll go to another story, which again I felt that I wanted more from you. It's the parlays you had during the emergency period, the secret parlays with and your allusions to the discussions you have in Miranda House, India Coffee House. All these discussions. I'm talking. One is the emergency thing. The other is the Miranda House. Another one is India Coffee House. All those meetings and discussions. Where have they gone today in India's discourse? Even Lutyens Delhi is under attack nowadays. So how can we recreate this atmosphere of informed debate? I was very keen to know more about that. But again, you just tell about what you did in emergency in a few sentences, and then you move on to another one. So I felt I need to know a little bit more about it.
Two things. One is, I think we can never say that the space is not available. I don't think the current terrible situation we are in of, let us say, political dominance with great fear of dissent should be seen as the overall blanket to dissent. So I think dissent, forming groups to challenge power is still happening, and maybe cannot reach the target that we were able to reach at that time. That's a good point, that the environment in those days was such that dissent plus its articulation in what was at that time an alternative political party could be done because there was more tolerance and there was less of a fear, less of a kind of close to police state, which is what we have now. So people were less frightened. And I also think another characteristic or phenomena of that era, which is often not mentioned, and therefore I'm mentioning it, and I would love it to be challenged also, and that is there was much less presence and power of business. I think corporate sector is now a very big player in our politics. If you take the 70s and 80s, I don't think it was such a big player. Remember the privatization issue, all of that came in a big way after 1993. So in 77, 75, 76, it was more the state and then civil society and then the elected politicians. Just sometime some young person should look at the characters within parliament before 75, the characterization of the members of parliament, who they were, and then look at what happened when Rajiv Gandhi came. You see a drama there. The Lok Sabha after Rajiv Gandhi came was full of corporate men, corporate people. The Lok Sabha before that were lawyers, public activists, civil servants, and of course, corporate. It's a drama, if you can see. And that reflects also what kind of nature of leadership and governance and power. So power shifted from that kind of parliament, which was civil society, lawyers, retired politicians, to corporate. And corporate was supported by the economic policy also. So once that happens, this dissenting voice gets marginalized and pressured. Then if the two combine, state, police and finance, then this other voice can be dampened and crushed as it's being done now. But I must not end by not commending the fact that despite all this pressure, a lot of public people's organizations are on dissent and they're not frightened. And most public discourse must recognize that and support it. Because I often wonder, you're quite right, I'm 87. And it's not a nice feeling to feel that I might die before I see a change in the relationship between state and the people of the country. So it's up to you, because you're younger than me, and the younger generation, to make that shift in power so that I might die peacefully and not think that I'm leaving the country when it's completely overwhelmed by state power.
Well, there are changes taking place in the world. Let's hope that changes take place here too. You had written about your, this whole thing about, even though you came from a conservative family, you were able to hitchhike across Europe. You were living single in Oxford, and you faced all the problems a single woman faces even today. And it was women who helped you at that time to, in some way or the other. You did, jobs in cafes and bars and all that. So, what happened? Where don't you have more stories to talk about women networking? Because I feel that a lot of single women have to bond together so that they get, where you don't feel alone. I mean, there's one page where you talk about how utterly alone you felt, the trauma of being alone, especially, and no one to look forward to. At that time, I think this is something which every woman goes through at some point or the other in her life, especially when they're single women. So would you have elaborated a little bit more?
Let us break that into a couple of parts. See, I think that there were many women in that era, especially freedom struggle and post-freedom struggle, who did break all rules. I don't know if you know the life story of Kamala Devi, but I don't want to mention it now in case somebody who thinks differently gets into a debate which distracts us from what we are talking about. But almost every woman leader of that era, and you can take Aruna Asaf Ali, Kamala Devi, so many others, I'm forgetting their names.
Kalpana Joshi.
Who had not necessarily stuck to anybody they married. And there was a lot of affairs going on in the male-female picture of the freedom struggle, both amongst the left and the non-left. So my first reply to you is, let it not be said that that was not that generation, and my generation and your generation. I think in all these generations, there have been people who broke out of the chains of morality and conservatism. But sometimes it was many and it came out in the public. Sometimes it was few and did not come out in the public. How many of you know the private stories of Kamala Devi, Sucheta Kripanani and others? Very few. And you don't want to open up because they are the famous women leaders of the freedom struggle. So nobody wants to say that because then it looks as if you're washing their dirty linen in the public. But everybody had that kind of freedom. And I think if you even go earlier, when I was doing my early book, Indian Women, we found a massive number of women belong to conservative families who are breaking out in terms of what is called choices in partner. I don't want to call it sexual freedom. I would like to call it choice affair. That's having love affairs, to be quite direct. So I don't think we can call it generational. But now, if you look at the big difference, colleges and schools have become co-ed. In our time, it was not. You only went to a women's college, as I did. I wanted to do my postgrad, but the only college in Bangalore which had postgrad was Central College, which was a mixed college, and my parents wouldn't let me go. Today, you go to any of these big universities around us here in Delhi, they're all mixed. Hostels are also mixed. So there's so much change in India that I think we cannot compare too much about relationships and the power to do those relationships between then and now. What do you think? Don't you think it's a very big difference?
In a way, yes. But I think the issues remain the same. And there are people today also who are bold enough. And there are a lot of people who are regressing. So, but I think in your generation, those who were educated, those who were in urban areas, those who were in the forefront of a lot of movements, had a lot more conviction and freedom to do so. That's what I feel.
Well, I'm not sure because I think to compare that generation with current and say we had born and they don't have that, I doubt that. But I don't think I've done enough empirical work. But what little perceptions I have, I think university students and lecturers and NGO people are all full of guts and full of willingness to face the world. Now, for example, gay the gay situation. My time, you don't even mention it. Now, LGBTQ is a public phenomena. And so many of my friends and children of my own relatives are gay. And it's all part of the change in India. And in that gay freedom domain, I think women are gainers because women are the ones who could be easily flattened out or having different sexual orientation from the conventional male-female. But no, they're leading in the gay rights. I don't want to mention it, but I have a relative in Bangalore who's leading gay rights. And you would never have imagined in the family she came from that it would be possible within 2 generations. So I admire India for that one reason. I mean, India has many faults, and today's India's spaces are full of warts and holes. But we have been so liberal in accepting the forms of sexuality. I'm so pleased. I mean, to imagine that Kerala transgenders are allowed to be conductors in a bus. Yeah. It doesn't happen in most countries in Africa, and I doubt how many countries in Europe would accept that too. So we are full of contradictions, but this part we must celebrate. The acceptance of alternative sexualities.
At the Hyderabad Literary Festival, we always are inclusive. We definitely have sessions and participation on these topics every time. So I'm very happy to share that with you. I wanted to talk to you also about the sexual harassment you faced and about the Me Too movement today. Has it made any difference?
Which one shall I do first? My experience or Me Too movement? Me Too movement.
Me Too movement wasn't there when you were there.
I admired it, but I felt that we were applauding a narrow section of society, whereas it was in the broader domain of, let us say, Anganwadi workers in a village, women all over the place. The Me Too space which Me Too occupied and the kind of publicity it got was so far away from the masses of women who are facing that kind of treatment of saying, if you don't give me sex, I will punish you in the professional area. You might have read that in the garment factories, which as you know today, the garment factories are like prisons. You must be hearing reports of girls are brought from rural areas, put into a hostel in a city like Bangalore or whatever, and they are more or less kept in that jail so that they may give the time that they want. There, I've heard so many stories, and even TV has put it, and my niece Geeta Arahamadan in Bangalore has written about it, that the supervisor is usually a man, and unless you give him sexual favors, he counts it wrong. He says you didn't come on time. He doesn't let you go to the lavatory. It's very similar to what is happening in tea plantations and in BD workers. I've written about that. Yeah. If you don't offer sexual favors to the man who's supervising, then he punishes you by not giving you the wage that you deserve. So tell me, in that space of tea workers, garment workers, how does this Me Too movement link, and how does the Me Too movement support them or give them? They're already having their own way of fighting. And so I admired that fact that it came out, but I felt it was very much a class of people who could get publicity with that kind of, because that's the kind of space they occupy. But I would love it if the same kind of attention was paid to what's happening in the garment industry in India, where the supervisor is saying, you don't do, or the tea industry, which I've written about, or the beady making industry, where if you don't give favors to the supervisor, you're counted wrong or you're measured wrong. So it's a very, so Me Too is a very narrow thing, in my view.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I've seen all these people and I've worked with them too. Help doesn't always reach them, and when it does reach them, it has a lot of consequences. I mean, it's too complex an issue and nobody is really fully addressing it. And I think that if we start discussing it, I'm sure that it'll take a large part of the time, and we're already running against time. So But I fully agree with you that all these rights and rights we're talking about are still not reaching the people whom we want to empower. And people like us should do more and more to see that we stand up for their rights.
Yes, indeed. Let us face it, the economic and social inequality in India has not been dented post-freedom as we must have wanted, the freedom fighters must have wanted. A much more benign, much more evened out society, I'm sure. There's Gandhi or his successors. We have not been able to achieve that. So there are 2 or 3 layers by which we should see this. There's gross economic inequality. And you know that. Even yesterday in the papers it came out that we are following the Piketty kind of situation where we have more people getting greater wealth in India now, when we have this crisis and we have the migrants dying on the road and we have wealth increasing. And that kind of economic contradiction is because of economic policy. Let's not think it's anything else. So when you have that gross inequality as burning, and then you have, of course, the farmers at the gates of Delhi, then you come to say, are you satisfied with the fact that we're doing something about gender equality or gendered participation? There I would concentrate, from my point of view, on women as workers. It is true, women as workers have several issues which have not been sufficiently transformed. I started my career by saying that there are women who are actually contributing to GDP in numbers, which is not recognized by the statistical system because the way they are measuring what is gainful, what is contributing, what is not. Now that is extended by the young feminists of today. See, you're not counting the value of home-based work. That is not home-based productive work, but home-based social work, that is childcare, cooking. So there's a lot of movement there. And I'm still not fully with the second crown because I still feel, for God's sake, identify those who are doing what is called economically conventional work and give them the better wage, unionize them. And these women are saying, recognize this other thing also because there's great burden there. So we are moving only that much, but you have to be moved much more into the space which you are talking about. Where
we are not even recognizing people in the professions. For example, in agriculture, we don't recognize women as major participants, and they are major participants in agriculture.
Absolutely. So there are 2 issues. One is counting them correctly, because they're actually contributing. Counting them differently, which is what the modern feminist is saying, that count her value of what she's doing in the home as cooking, cleaning, so on. And then offering them a greater space in the employment program. All these 3 things we have failed. All these 3.
I loved your term of, the oppression of vocabulary. I think that was the right thing. In fact, in the study I was doing, they were trying to identify women beneficiaries for loans as wives of eligible men. So, that's the kind of things that happen in the grassroots level. But more importantly, when you talk about women's participation in labor force and economic activity, the pandemic and earlier, of course, even the demonetization have really cut down the participation of women, alarmingly, even compared to, our South Asian countries like Pakistan or Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Women's participation in employment has drastically come down, and this is very serious, not just for the independence of women, but also because there are many single, women families, single income earner women families that are affected. And we don't seem to have any policies that are looking at these things. Would you like to suggest 1 or 2 policy pointers?
I'm glad you touched on that. And I know that has been one of the big concerns amongst all of us. And I'd like to hand over my kind of role to the next generation, which have taken it much farther and which really wants to fight these battles. And I think counting one issue, let's leave that for a moment. You're not counting correctly, even those who are in work. When I say you, I mean the government. True, it's quite true that all these emergency of the pandemic has reduced unequally. That is, the number of women who have lost jobs who are not getting it back are more than men. So let's take that also. But the bigger issue, I think, is that we haven't created an employment map and a program of absorbing labor in a way that adds to the GDP in a more sensible way. Why I mention that is, if you go back a little to the 1990s and the 1980s and 70s, when people like K.N. Raj, Pitambar Pant, Raj Krishna, Shukmoy Chakravarti were in and around the Planning Commission, at that time, the major goal of the plan was to create employment. It was not like you get growth through export of garments and jaggery and sugar, and then you find that from that money little drops to give employment to your country. Employment was the basis of the economic growth model. Now, that makes a very big difference, how you look at the economic plan, whether you look at the goal as absorbing every labor, or you look at the goal as exporting more to earn more foreign exchange, or you look at the goal as what has happened now, make the corporates richer than they used to be. So there, I think the answer to your question cannot be a simple one-liner. It has to be, what is the model on which you're building your economic policy, generally speaking? And you will, of course, you're on the verge of a budget. And I doubt if in the budget, you're going to give a doable program for absorbing unemployment. They talk of the need, but to do that would require a very different kind of relationship between capital, labor, enterprise. The enterprise always has to be a big one with international finance, which is not going to give you jobs. The enterprise is going to something which I don't want to mention Gandhi and his KVI, Khadi program, which I believe in it, but most feminists don't. But if it's a program of employment starting from below, it's a totally different ball game. For credit, for infrastructure, for raw materials, and for what you want to do with your GDP. If you want your GDP to be shown to the world as having bought up a factory in Germany, that's a different thing. So there's a goaling of where this finance minister and this government wants to show itself off. It wants to show itself off in its export, it's different. It wants to show it off that I've fed and given bread, water, and as Mandela used to say, to every Indian, that's a different policy. So I think there is a very big crisis in our country now, where we are not looking at what is our goal for the economies for the people of India, and not for showing off what all we can do.
It's a very sobering.
Are we ready to take questions from the audience?
Amita, I have a lot of questions. I'm not going to ask the rest of them to her because it's a very short session. Please. But I definitely want to end my session with her with a quote from her book, which I think is the biggest message her book, I may be wrong, but I think, in my opinion, it is the message that should go to most women. Freedom and self-reliance come with risk, and the life of a free woman cannot be insulated from hurt. Sometimes the most we can do is to learn not to be broken by our experiences, to rebuild our lives with what materials are at hand, bit by bit, slowly and patiently. Thank you very much, ma'am. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, even though we just flitted from one thing to the other because of the time pressure. It would be lovely to talk to you again. Thank you so much.
We'll take a few questions, Kinnera.
I apologize for the delay and the tools not working as fast as they should.
No, not an issue. And we have
no office today, so I opened my computer in my son's house and it had all the problems of how to get it going. So sorry.
We are not cutting the session short. We will take a few questions that are there. If you will allow me to ask the first question, I have one or two myself, Devaki Ji, but I would like to say what an awe-inspiring individual you are. It has been wonderful to hear you here, and you have lived a life on your terms, and I think that itself is a great message. As an economist and as the subject that is in discussion and not adequate, I must confess, how can domestic work that women perform be monetized appropriately? I think there is very half-hearted attempt being made and some little media noise being made. But how can we effectively and appropriately monetize this? Or should we not?
Are you specifically asking about demonetization?
No, I'm asking about monetization of women working in their own homes as domestic work, and to monetize that, because that's something that's being raked up now, that they should be, it should be monetized, that there should be salary, or there should be quantum that the family should accept, that this is what she is earning, despite of the fact that she's working in her own space, in her own home.
Anita, you're speaking not only the language, but also the desire and the vision of many of the young feminist economists of today in India. They're only working, or if not only, but working very diligently on this issue of valuing what is called normally domestically defined work, cooking, caring, and cleaning, and giving it a value. I must confess that this was an issue in which I was also engaged in the 70s. Mm-hmm. 70s, there was a woman in England whose name I've forgotten, and she's no more. She started a movement, and I'm mentioning this deliberately, not to take you away from your question or to make the answer very long, but to say that this is not a new issue. She started something called Wages for Housework. It was brilliant. And this was my time, the 1960s. And we didn't have internet then, but somehow it came through various things. And I got hooked into it. I thought, what a good idea. But then I changed my mind, and since you asked my view, I must tell you my view. At the moment, there are many, many hundreds of women in India, especially down in the villages, the rural areas, maybe in the slums, who are adding to the formal GDP, that is adding product to what can be measured as GDP, but they are not counted. And I've got examples from all my literature that there's a woman weaving a grass mat in the home of in a home in Mangalore. The man is selling vegetables. The government goes and gives credit to the man to get a cart so that he makes his productivity better, but doesn't recognize that the woman also needs some support. So there is, before we go into wages for housework, what you called valuing women's work, I feel there's a prior problem. That is, we are not identifying the conventional contribution to conventional GDP by at least 30% of India's labor force. That's why, in my view, you're showing such a low women's participation rate, a question that you asked in the beginning. Why is women's participation rate so low? It's not. It's just that they're not identifying them as workers. And yet they are actually contributing in the conventional GDP. The unconventional is housework, I mean product in terms of services. So you're asking the wrong person, because I've been gripped with this issue for a long time, and I'm also in supporting the woman who said wages for housework. But I also would like the prior role of the feminists of India today. For God's sake, take the women who are now, did you know that a carpet in Kashmir, the whoop and the warp or whatever it's called, is done by women. Then the man actually does the loom. But she's not recognized. There's no wage fixation for her. And yet there should be a wage fixation for that woman, for the woman who beats the silver before the Orissa craftsman makes a silver product, for the women who are rearing the cocoons in the hut, which then goes into silk, which goes into big industry. She's not identified. Her wage is not given. So I have a prior problem. For God's sake, take her and count her in as a worker. Then you can go and get your housewives to also be considered workers. So it's just a question of priority of goal. Not that I don't think the other is a valuable issue, but there's a prior issue that should be addressed because there's a wage involved in that. Am I making sense?
Very true. No, I think you did answer it, and you do have a perspective, and we respect that, of course. The woman has to be seen first and heard as well. And I think we have a long way to go, because if this is something you started in the 70s, we haven't quite made a dent yet. She's neither seen nor heard, and which is why, in the context of Me Too, while it is true that it made only certain section of women visible because they could be, but that was a good beginning, because they were already out there and visible and had a voice. And once we are heard, then we are probably going to be able to move a little further and closer, perhaps, because a feminist of your generation has already been working, but we're still dealing with the same issues and continue to move on in that struggle, But I would like to take up one or two more questions. Varsha Shinoy is asking, as a feminist economist, what are Professor Jain's views on Kamal Hassan's party's proposal to monetarily, or it's the same question. Sorry, I've already jumped that, Varsha. Isn't it time that the state compensate the angel in the house? She has answered this, so I will move on. Parvati Shastri is asking, India currently has only two communities. One, the minorities, and two, people who get offended for everything. Where is room for sane conversation or different opinions? Your take on this, Devaki ji.
I don't like people being named as the basis of a question. This phenomena that this questioner is asking, that there's no room for challenging, that's widespread. Now we can identify it with individuals who are not willing to accommodate difference, or you can identify it with a space which doesn't accommodate difference, or you can identify it with religion which does not accommodate difference. So I think to collapse that question into one answer, for me, is difficult. I would propose that there is a definite intolerance of difference. And I think the brilliant book has been written by my friend Ramila Thapar called Dissent, which goes beyond just dissent in Ashoka's time, but it actually starts from there saying dissent is part of India's tradition, but that we are losing the capacity to accommodate dissent right now. And may God bless her, that is absolutely an important message. So if you quote Brinda Karat now and ask me to answer on what she says, it's not fair. What the question should be, how do we accommodate the fact that there are different views in India on not only politics but economics? India was open. It used to allow difference. You should see the debate between K.N. Raj and Amartya Sen, who were close friends on economic policy. It's a whole book. And it shows how important it is to have difference and how important argument is for clarity of thought. And our Upanishads speak endlessly about the importance of dialogue and debate in order to come to the crystal answer. So there is no doubt in India today, dissent is not at all accommodated, not only amongst ourselves, like there's too much Hindutva domination. I'm saying that openly. I want to censor it, you can censor it. But there is also too much domination of one form of economics. I'm just wondering whether Nirmala would allow some of the NGOs and others who would like certain economic policies changed to be one of the groups that she consults. By and large, they'll consult corporates and they'll consult a selected group of economists. But will they consult economists who are struggling to get the people who migrated out or the farmers who are there to be part of the economics package? I doubt it. So those are some of the areas we should really concentrate on. I would love all these people who are asking the questions, mobilize themselves to come to that space which is open now. Let us take all the universities and the Hyderabad people doing some seminars on Ramila's book called Dissent. You may say, it's uptight, defense. No, take bits of it. Say, what was dissent like in the Buddhist time and why is it gone now? And then you straight away hit on the fact that politics has changed. And then you learn where's your lever for pushing that back. So I think the younger generation should find levers, LEVRS, to nudge and budge the current overwhelming machinery that is upon us. Political and economic machinery is absolutely on us. And I wish I was 25 or 30 years younger. I used to wish all kinds of things. You will laugh at me, but I want people to laugh at me because I'm very laughable at. I used to think when the demonetization and other things came up, I used to tell my friends, listen, 5 or 6 of us old women at that time, Aparna Basu was also alive. We'll wear white saris. We'll go and sit in Dharna in front of a Prime Minister's gate. We'll attract so much media. These old women in white saris, widows are all sitting here. And then we say, we won't budge from here until you remove the demand. You can imagine. You would think it's bad. But in a way, people like Kamala Devi, Aruna Safari did things like that. Kamala Devi took a torn flag, which was lying on the Bombay, and held it up when the British pulled out the flag. She picked up the flag, though guns were on the Bombay Circle, and then put it back on a stick and marched with it. I mean, that's a demonstration of guts and protest. And we can do that. I mean, I think women's women should do that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Very true.
Anita?
Very true. Very true. Very true, Devaki. Absolutely. Time is now definitely running out. But you know what? I was very intrigued when you were talking about some incident that Kinnera had asked. And you let out one very beautiful sentence saying naughty man things. I would so love to hear you talk about your naughty man things. Though I think we have only 1 minute or so left. Perhaps we have to call you back again and talk about that. And learn more about your incredibly colorful and very brave life that you have depicted in this book. Thank you so much for being with us. Apologies also that we had to rush you and get you going. Very happy that the audience not only stayed on.
I've had many of these, but I've always been able to come on time, 20 minutes before, put on the TV. But
I believe that, yes.
Caught.
I believe that. Yes, no, I believe that. And I'd like you to know that not only did the audience stay back, but they came back in bigger numbers. So you have a sizable group looking at you, watching the session in the YouTube. They will be on our archive, and therefore people will be watching this. We're very happy that you were part of Hyderabad Literary Festival this year. And thank you so much for a very, very enlightening and incisive session. Thank you. Thank you, Kinnera, for taking through these wonderful questions and taking us through the book, the brass notebook, very, very systematically. It's almost as if, and I haven't, but I will at the very next opportunity pick up the book and read. But it's almost as if I have through this conversation. Thank you so much, Kinnera. Thank you, Devaki ji. Wonderful to have you here. Namaste.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for starting me off on this. And Anita, it's a great honor to be on the same platform as you. I've heard about you. I've been wanting to meet you.
No, yeah, you can go offline. Yes, please.
So please do get in touch with me.